This panel is about Dark Whispers Volume 1, Australia's first all-female horror anthology feature. So we're joined by Megan Riakos, who is she's a dynamic filmmaker bringing a distinctive lens to the world of genre filmmaking. She's the creator of Australia's first all-female horror anthology, Dark Whispers Volume 1, is the writer, director, producer of the suspenseful thriller Crushed, and follows these up with No Pain, No Gain, an unnerving episode of the Shudder original Dead House Dark horror series. She's also founder of Hemlock and Cedar films and is based in Sydney, Australia. And then based in Tasmania, Australia, is Briony Kidd, a film and theatre maker, script editor, and creativity coach. She's also the co-founder and director programmer of Stranger With My Face International Film Festival, an influential event focusing on underrepresented perspectives in horror and related genres. So take it away.
Well, thanks so much for having us, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. So just be a second while I pull this up. Okay, so before we get started, I just wanted to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and also the Palawa Pakana peoples of the Lutruwita, Tasmania. So we acknowledge them as the traditional custodians of the lands on which myself and my co-presenter Briony Kidd are also streaming from today. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and also wish to acknowledge any First Nations people who are joining us for this event today. So yes, my name is Megan Riakos. I am the creator of Dark Whispers Volume 1, and Briony Kidd with me is the associate producer of the anthology, and together we've created the Dark Whispers educational module.
You've muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so what is Dark Whispers? So before I can present to you the educational module, I just want to give you a little bit of a background on the actual feature film. So Dark Whispers is a curated anthology feature film made from existing shorts gathered via an industry call out. So in 2018, we put a call out to the Australian industry through the main press magazines, IF Magazine, through the guilds, various women in film groups, asking for pre-existing short films. And the requirements for this was it needed to be directed by an Australian woman or based in Australia. There was no specific theme or element, just that it was within the horror genre. It needed to be under 20 minutes, and it could be recent or older shorts. So the important note there is older shorts. We did not want the age of the short to be a barrier. I think the women in film movement has really changed a lot, even just in the last 5 years, that films that are, say, a little bit older than 5 years may not have found an audience or had access in the way that more recent films have been made. So we wanted to make sure that we kind of scooped up, you know, all of that potential, all of that talent that maybe has gone unrecognized. So how was it created? So the curation process, Briony Kidd and myself curated the film. So we got over 50 short films submitted, which I think is a really great result. You know, a lot of people say, oh, women don't make horror, women don't make dark stuff. And this was a really great example of how, a lot of people were working in this space and just there wasn't an outlet for it. So in that curation process, Briony and I were really looking for films that had a strong voice. So of course, form is really important, but it was about what they were trying to say, the content and that voice of the filmmaker that we were really interested in. We selected 10 films and they all showcased a different approach to horror and to have different perspectives. And the really interesting thing out of the films and even the broader kind of array of 50 films is we found that there were a lot of similarities in regards to the way that they were put together. Even though they were still quite diverse, the majority of them were really character-driven genre films, and they often subverted some of the traditional horror tropes that we're used to seeing. So for example, one of the films, White Song by Katrina Irawadi-Graham, focuses on the Kuntul Anak, which is a very common, well, a very famous Indonesian ghost that appears in lots of films and, you know, pop culture and mythology But often the kuntilanak anak is represented as like an evil spirit, a malicious spirit. And Katrina's gone and subverted this trope and made that character the protagonist, where we feel empathy for this character and we kind of understand why this ghost is really not a happy ghost, I guess. So it's kind of like examples like that, you know, show that different perspective, that female lens that isn't always necessarily the overtly, you know, in this instance, there is definitely a feminist kind of message, but there's lots of things in there that aren't necessarily that typical feminist statement, but it's through that female lens. And I think it's that idea that female films don't always have to be overtly feminist to still have that that point of difference. So once we had chosen those 10 films, I wrote a framing story that then tied all of those 10 films together, and that then brought in, you know, the common theme, a common thread that kind of drew them all together was this idea that each of the films kind of had a lesson or a little bit of information about how to live life, or a warning, which came into this idea of there being a book. So the Book of Dark Whispers, and each chapter is one of the segments and kind of one life lesson along the way. So I'm just going to show you this trailer, and we'll also pop in the chat just in case it's not working for you. So that's in the chat, but I will see if the trailer goes. Okay, great. So why was Dark Whispers created? So I made my first feature pre-Me Too, pre-Women in Film kind of time, and really came up against a lot of sexism and just like structural challenges, I would say. So there was a real lack of opportunity. So I was looking to create my own opportunities, and also for a lot of the women around me who I knew were trying to kind of get into this space and not getting that. So it's creating a new pathway. And this film was very low budget. It was relatively quick. It required minimal resources. So very much an indie filmmaker kind of attitude. And I was able to use a lot of lessons from my first feature on this one. So it was really important to me to be able to open the door for others as well to join the ride, showcase voices from marginalized groups, and challenge the status quo in the genre. So it's really important to go back to how I even got into, I guess, the horror genre. And that started with Stranger with My Face International Film Festival. So Briony Kid is the founder of this festival, and one of my short films was invited back in 2012. At that time, I did not even know that my short film was a horror film, which is a really common statement that a lot of female filmmakers making horror films make. I was like, no, it's a psychological thriller. So it was an amazing festival, this small but mighty festival down in Tasmania. I met a strong community of filmmakers, a few I know who are in the audience here today. And I saw a lot of really interesting films and voices that were not being recognised more broadly. So in this space, it was celebrated, and we could really see these amazing ideas coming up, but it just weren't kind of getting access elsewhere. So part of this inspired me to become an advocate for women, along with my experience on my first feature. And many of the women I met down in Tassie, we've banded together and continued advocacy, one of which is through the creation of Women in Film and TV Australia, of which I'm a co-founder, and so is Briony. So anyway, I finally teamed up with Briony on a creative project, and we curated this anthology together. And since then, that anthology has been used to launch workshops, educational programs, and combining our love of dark genre with advocacy. So I'm going to pass this over to Briony now. She's going to explain a little bit more about Stranger with My Face, and I guess that women in horror movement in Australia.
Yeah, so just very briefly, it was originally founded by myself and Rebecca Thompson, and we're two Tasmanian filmmakers. And essentially, we just had short films that were on the horror festival circuit internationally. And it's very hard to get anywhere with a short horror film. Well, it was at that point, because in Australia, there were very few avenues, particularly if you're making something a bit weird that doesn't quite fit the prescribed sort of boxes, or people don't quite know what to make of it. So I was really inspired by a festival called Viscera Film Festival, which was based in LA. And at that point, Viscera Film Festival was showcasing short horror films by women. And they also had this amazing thing where they put together their catalogue of short films, you know, like a Vimeo catalogue or something like that. And they made it available to anyone who wanted to look through it, to curate their own selection of short films for a Women in Horror Month event. So Women in Horror Month was sort of part of the grassroots Women in Horror movement at that time that was sort of becoming quite strong. So what Heidi did with Viscera Film Festival, by making those short films available to me and just sort of making it something easy to, you know, let's just curate some short films and have an event because it's Women in Horror Month. So I did that, and then my friend Rebecca was, you know, helping me with it, and it very quickly was like, oh, but I want to screen this other film. Oh, but I've heard of this film. Oh, what about this feature film? Oh, we could have a art exhibition. And it just quickly snowballed into a film festival. So it was actually fairly accidental at first. And then it went on and got grants, and, you know, other people got involved, and it became quite a big thing. Next slide, Megan. So really, yeah, so the name of it is actually sort of important to mention just briefly, because it was originally called Stranger with My Face Horror Film Festival. And at that time, it seemed really important to me to use the word horror very boldly and unapologetically, because it was that whole thing of women do make horror, they like horror, just deal with it. And so that was why it was called that. But and the name was also a nod to the Lois Duncan young adult novel. So that's a little bit of the two things don't go together, obviously, because obviously Stranger with My Face, the novel, if you've read it, is a fairly subtle sort of psychological story about an evil twin. So I guess with those combination of elements, I was kind of saying horror is what I want it to be, what we want it to be. And this is our version of the horror festival, and it's not a bunch of guys with black t-shirts on, because that was pretty much what horror festivals were at that point. If you went to them, it's a line of guys with black t-shirts and like maybe one woman sort of looking timid at the end. So the idea of that too was to state right up front that it was going to be about the sort of films that I was interested in. So the psychological ideas of doubling and the monster within and all those kind of things that were always a bit more interesting to me. Next slide, Megan. So it evolved, it became quite a big event, very actually quite influential in various people's careers in some ways, but it was always filmmaker focused. So about getting filmmakers together to meet and talk and work with each other and connect with other artists as a sort of cross-disciplinary focus as well, and to mingle really directly with audiences as well. And a lot of collaborations and projects sort of actually emerged out of the event. Next slide, Megan. And yeah, again, so the curatorial approach for me, and I think this goes into Dark Whispers as well, was just about finding the spark of some kind of something special, some kind of voice. So even if it's a bit rough as a film, it's saying something. There's something being expressed through horror. It's not just, oh, you know, I've got a friend who does makeup special effects, so let's make a vampire film. It's a bit more than that. Like there's something that's coming through that's quite deep. That's the kind of films that I was always looking for. But as the festival went on, it was really interesting that we eventually started to move away from talking so much about horror. And that was partly because we're just sick of having a conversation all the time of, on the one hand, people saying, oh, I don't like horror. Whenever you mention the festival, they'd be like, oh, I don't like it, because they have these really fixed preconceptions about what horror is, which are usually wrong, that would sort of keep them away. But also then you would always get into the discussion about, do women really like horror, and why do women like horror, and are women any good at horror, and all this sort of things. And after about 4 or 5 years of that, I got very sick of it. So started to just talk about dark genre, to keep it a little bit looser, because having that constant discussion about the definitions became a little bit counterproductive. And I started to just think about, you know, is this a stranger with my face film more than is this a horror film? So it's sort of my definition, or the event's definition, of what that might mean, I suppose. Next slide, maybe. Yeah, so the sorry, go on.
Yeah, I'll take this one. So back to the module. So why do we even decide to create the module? You know, it's you know, we finished the film and we saw an opportunity to kind of combine, I think, some of the various things that we do. We love making films. That's the way we're in it. But we also have a really strong advocacy bent. We've got this, you know, community that we really love and want to nurture. So all of those things, you know, kind of aligned with some of the business angles that we were looking at. So one of the things is, when you make a film, you have to try and exploit it in as many different ways as possible in order to kind of recoup your funds. And an educational module is one way to, I guess, bring to light the film to a different audience. We were also able to get some COVID funding grant, which was really great. Our screening tour was cancelled during COVID, and one of the local councils here gave money out to arts organisations that were impacted. So we thought this was a good way to have a bit of an experiment and see, you know, whether or not this is something that could work, and tick a few boxes in our aims and our goals, and whether or not it might be useful for us to do on future films. Also, indie making ethos, we are always looking at different ways of doing things. We also wanted to continue the Stranger with My Face presence, and my company as well, Hemlock and Cedar Films, and generally just building our own brands and the brands of our fellow filmmakers. It's also an opportunity to keep the discussion going. Like, we really enjoy this conversation of, as much as Briony says, oh, it's annoying having to always, you know, argue about whether or not something's horror. It is really great, I think, talking about the art form and talking about the genre and different films that are coming out and kind of interrogating those things. But it's also about talking about this project on our own terms versus the way press or critics who might come from a more traditional approach of what horror is. You know, this film, there are a couple of, you know, there's more female horror filmmakers out there now, but still predominantly the critics come from a very old school kind of idea of what a horror film is. And so it's a great way for us to be able to say, oh, actually, this is what we're getting at. And it promotes Australian women in horror movements specifically, and marginalised filmmakers generally. So what actually is the module? So it's a PDF of 60+ pages. It includes some video and audio resources as well. An institution can purchase Dark Whispers, the film, to be provided to students through their library, or it can be purchased commercially. So it's on iTunes, Google Play, or directly from Vimeo. It's not in every single region, but it's in all of, I think, North America, UK, Australia, and various other regions across the world. And the module's provided as one large document, but also sections that can be pulled out and presented separately, so omitted for some users. And, you know, the overall module is for tertiary or adults, but a modified version can also be created for high school use. So I'll pass this over to Briony, who's going to go through some of the details of the module.
Yes, so I'll just go through this really quickly. So it's got the basic stuff about the project and all of the specs of it. Just keep flicking through, Megan. It's got an overview of the background and intentions of the project, I guess what we've just talked about, why it came about, what we're trying to do, and all of that sort of stuff. It's got a little bit on definitions of horror, but working with I suppose a practical definition in terms of like how do people actually use the term in the industry and why, and touching a little bit on academic definitions, but not going too far into that. And also there's a little bit on the filmmakers themselves and their definitions of it. Yeah, keep going, Megan. And then, yeah, I've already talked about that, I think. A short history of the horror anthology. Now, there is a section on this because it's quite important to explain the context of that for people who may not be familiar with the horror anthology sort of backstory in cinema. And I'm sure most of the people listening to this do know quite a bit about horror anthologies through film and television. But the key point really is just that, if you just want to flick through those pages, Megan, the key point really to explaining all that is to get across the fact that the horror anthology was evolving quite dramatically. And it eventually became about using pre-existing shorts. I mean, there was a bunch of anthologies which had shorts commissioned specially for them as well. But the more prestigious the projects were, the more male dominated they were also, is the bottom line. So once they started to get these more indie sort of ones like ABCs of Death, which was 26 short films, you would get a few women creeping in, allowed to, you know, have a place at the table. And then it got even more indie than that, where festivals like A Night of Horror in Sydney did their own anthology, the Theoria Film Festival did their own anthology, and then the first all-women North American anthology, XX. And so this project of ours is sort of a response to that, just saying, well, Australia needs to have our version of that. It's very much a sort of a grassroots notion, I suppose, of sort of taking back the genre in this sort of really small way, but it's symbolic, I suppose. Keep going, Megan. So the core content of the module, I guess the really essential part is that there's 4 pages on each of the segments of the anthology. So that's the 10 short films plus the wraparound, or the framing story that Megan created. So just as a really quick example, The Man Who Caught a Mermaid, which is a short film by Caitlin Collar. I don't think we've got time to
yeah, we probably don't have to
go through.
That's okay. We'll pop a link in the trailer afterwards. You guys can check it out. But Caitlin Tinker is the
yeah. So she speaks about it really interestingly, and we'll put that as part of the module as well, the video. But essentially, there's a page that's a summary of the film, and there's a quote from the filmmaker explaining their impetus for the film. Yeah, keep going, that's fine. And it's really important to have that right up the front there in their own words, I think. And also that page has a section about the filmmaker's career and their background and what they're trying to do and where this project fits in. And there's also then an analysis of the genre context, the subgenre of horror that it sort of fits into, the themes of the film. And then the next page is, yeah, so it just goes deeper into the themes and has some sort of provocations for classroom discussions. And then it goes into influences. So in this case, I've got there that the influences are Hammer horror and Guillermo del Toro. So sort of interesting mix there. And then the next page is behind the scenes. And there's also a quote that's advice to aspiring filmmakers from Caitlin. And I think that was really important to kind of convey to the students who might be working with this module that this is sort of a peer-to-peer exchange. Like, you could be one of these filmmakers, you could make a film like this. It is designed to have a sort of aspirational DIY kind of feel to it, I guess. Yeah, so I don't think there's going to be time to look at more examples, but just really quickly, there's some additional content in there as well, some discussion around the reception of the film, the reviews and the online discussion and the trolling and all the sorts of stuff like that, which is really interesting. Just keep flicking through, Megan, I think that's on the next page. And there's some prompts for classroom discussion about the whole project. There's a section on the challenges and peculiarities of marketing a project like this. And there's also some suggested further reading, which is sort of the obvious text that everyone here would know about, but also some newer books that, you know, some have only just come out and some that are works in progress, like Heidi Honeycutt's working on a book at the moment, so we're trying to keep it sort of quite current as well as looking back into the past. Yeah, so I don't know, Megan, do you have time to quickly talk about
very quickly. This is a very interesting one. One of the things we're looking at is marketing of horror. So the first poster that you can see here is the festival poster that we designed. And festivals are generally, you've got a bit more of an art house audience. So we're going for a bit of an elevated poster there. And then once you sell the film, it goes off to a UK sales agent and they have complete creative control over the posters. So you can see the UK and the US release are very, very different looking posters and will attract a very different kind of audience. So this kind of stuff's really, I think, interesting to look at and opens up some of the subjects that might be interesting. So it's not just filmmaking or social studies, but, you know, media and communications. What are you communicating to your audience? So, you know, and as you can imagine, you know, probably it's a very different audience going for the film, looking at the one at the end, and they may not be getting what they're expecting, which does result in trolling. So I'll leave that there. Very quickly, users will find this module at universities, at high schools and libraries. We also, you can also do them in private workshops. We run those as well. You could do it as a 48-hour film challenge. So you kind of use the module to show people what's possible and then, you know, unleash them, and could be accompanied by a screening of the film with or without filmmaker guests. And just worth noting, both myself and Briony, although we're both practitioners, we also both teach at tertiary level. So, you know, University of Tasmania, University of New South Wales, Australian Film, Television, Radio School. So we come from it from a very practical angle, but are used to teaching in classrooms. The sticky questions, I'll just leave them there because we've run out of time, but we are more than happy to take any questions in the last couple of minutes, if there are any.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So if anyone has any questions, I mean, that's amazing. And I totally want to use this module. So just very quickly, so if we want to include this in our modules, in our units, where can we go? What's kind of the best port of call?
I'll pop my email address in the chat. The module, we're just finishing it up now, and actually we'd love any thoughts or advice, or if you are looking for something specific for your school or tertiary institution, like the kind of things that you're interested in, we'll be finishing it in early February, and then that'll be available for purchase, and I'll pop the contact details in there. But we would love your thoughts if you've got time to fill out a little survey.
Oh, yeah, that's great. There's a question from Donna saying, you may have already told us, but how can we get our librarian to order this?
I will speak to you directly, Donna, but I think anybody that form, there is a place in there to put your email address. So if you're interested in finding out when the module's ready, so early February it will be ready, we can then forward you any information, the details, and the best way that we can work with you depending upon where you are in the world, and we'll make sure that the film is available in your region before we'll negotiate with our sales agent if it's not in that region in order to sort that out. But yeah, best way to do that is either contact me directly at actually I should put that number up, but or fill out that survey and pop it in there. Yeah.
There was another question. Are there certain year groups, ages you recommend for this in secondary school? We've got someone asking as a New Zealand teacher of year 9 to 13 students.
The film's rated M, which in Australia, I think when you're, it means that it's recommended for 15 plus, but any age can watch it. But I'm pretty sure that in Australia, teachers are not supposed to show it unless they're 16. So I would say 16 and older.
Yeah. To see if we've got any other. We've got the links in the chat. I mean, we've got the amazing Donna McRae here as well. And I was just wondering, I mean, you mentioned that you both teach in kind of academia. I know Donna does. I mean, did you find that was something that I guess as filmmakers you keep in mind? I mean, your teaching experience, or is there a lot of crossover that you find with filmmakers working within kind of tertiary institutions and teaching?
There seems to be a lot. I think a lot of female horror filmmakers work as in tertiary institutions. It's very interesting. I think a lot of indie filmmakers, you know, we have to have multiple jobs. I think we love the art form and we love to share it, and it's a way for us to, I guess, delve into the interesting theory of filmmaking as well as the practical. And I know from my teaching and Briony as well, as we've been writing this module, it's definitely influenced the way that we've put this together, knowing what would be useful for us in a classroom.
Yeah. I mean, I just made a film myself that's been doing the festival rounds, and it's really amazing. I mean, I've found so so many screening opportunities with kind of women horror filmmaking festivals. It seems to be, it's growing so much. There's one obviously in Berlin. My film was shown at Wench Film Festival in India. So it's amazing that these film festivals, and I think Stranger with My Face was probably one of the first ones, it seems.
Yeah, it might have been. I think it's just very empowering too for filmmakers to realize that you can actually create your own opportunities. You can create your own festival if you want. Like, if no one's programming your film, just create your own festival, program your friends, and have a red carpet. And, you know, we always had a red carpet at Stranger with My Face, a bloody carpet, because you've got to make a big deal out of it. It is a big deal. You know, it's exciting, and it's important that people are spending time making art. So I think that's something I try to get across to students as well. Like, you can't just sort of send stuff out and hope that you get an opportunity, because it often doesn't happen. So see how you can create that opportunity or those networks for yourself.
Yeah. All right. We are out of time. So thank you both. That's amazing. I mean, I will be in touch because I want to use it in my horror module. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.